Hello, dear listeners. Welcome to the English Globe, your friendly podcast for learning English while exploring interesting topics from around the world. I am Adam, and today I am joined by my wonderful co-host, Julia. Julia, how are you today?
Hello, Adam. Hello, dear listeners. I am very excited to be here with you today. We have a very interesting topic that has caught the attention of many people around the world. Today, we are going to talk about a question that has been discussed widely in the media and on social platforms. Is Elon Musk going to be the next president of the United States? This is a question that sparks curiosity because Elon Musk is very famous as a billionaire entrepreneur, and many people know him for companies like Tesla and SpaceX.
That's right, Julia. Elon Musk is a very influential figure in technology, business, and even space exploration. People admire him for his innovations, and some even imagine what it would be like if he entered politics. Today, we are going to explore this idea carefully and explain why it is interesting, what the legal rules say, and how media and public perception play a role in such discussions.
Yes, Adam. And this is not only a topic about Elon Musk. It is also an opportunity for our listeners to practice English by learning new vocabulary related to politics, business, media, and citizenship. We will explain every term in simple words so that beginners can follow along. By listening carefully, you will improve your comprehension and gain confidence in understanding complex topics in English.
Before we go further, dear listeners, we would like to kindly ask you to like this video if you enjoy our podcast, and subscribe to the English Globe so you don't miss our future episodes. Your support helps us continue making interesting and educational content. Also, we love to hear from you. Please write in the comments where you are listening from and give your opinions about today's topic. Your thoughts are very valuable to us and to other learners.
Absolutely, Adam. Sharing your opinions is also a great way to practice English. You can write simple sentences, and over time, your writing will improve. Now, coming back to our topic, Elon Musk is a fascinating person because he is not only a businessman, but also a public figure who shares his opinions about many subjects, including technology, space, energy, and even social issues. This makes people curious about what he might do next, and some even wonder if he could become the President of the United States.
But Julia, before we jump to conclusions, it is important to remember that there are strict rules for who can become president in the United States. These rules are written in the Constitution, and they are very clear about citizenship, age, and residency. Even if someone is very famous and successful, like Elon Musk, they must meet these requirements to run for president. So today, we will discuss these rules in simple English so our listeners can understand them easily.
Yes, Adam. We will also discuss the difference between speculation in the media and actual eligibility under the law. This will help our listeners understand how to think critically when they see news online or on social media. Learning to separate facts from speculation is an important skill, especially when practicing English with current events.
And while we do that, we will introduce some new vocabulary that you can learn and use in your English practice. For example, words like billionaire, speculation, eligibility, influence, and public perception will appear naturally in our conversation. We will explain them clearly so that you can understand and remember them easily.
Exactly. And don't worry if you do not understand everything at first. Listening to a long conversation like this helps you gradually improve your comprehension. The more you listen, the more familiar you become with the words, phrases, and sentence structures. This is a very effective way to learn English, especially when combined with speaking and writing practice.
So, dear listeners, as we continue our discussion, try to think about these questions. Why do people imagine celebrities or business leaders as future presidents? How does public perception influence these discussions? And how important is it to understand the law before forming opinions about political possibilities? You can share your thoughts in the comments.
Yes, Adam. Today's episode will not only be interesting, but also educational. By the end of this episode, you will know more about Elon Musk, the rules for becoming a US president, and how media and public perception work together. You will also practice your English by listening to clear explanations and examples.
Thank you, Julia. And thank you to all our listeners for joining us today. Let's dive into this exciting topic step by step in a way that is easy to understand and useful for English learners. Remember to pay attention to the vocabulary, sentence structures, and the way we explain complex ideas simply.
That's right, Adam. Now, let's start by exploring the basic rules and requirements for becoming the President of the United States, so that we can understand why some people think this question about Elon Musk is very interesting. Stay with us as we break it all down in simple English. Now, Adam, let's start by talking about the rules that decide who can become the President of the United States. Many people do not know these rules clearly, but they are very important because they are written in the Constitution. According to the Constitution, to become president, a person must be a natural-born citizen of the United States, be at least 35 years old, and have lived in the country for at least 14 years. These rules are strict and cannot be ignored.
That is right, Julia. And for our listeners who are learning English, let me explain what natural-born citizen means. It means that a person must be born in the United States or born to parents who are U.S. citizens at the time of birth. This rule is very important because it is part of the Constitution and it cannot be changed easily. Even if someone is very rich or famous like Elon Musk, they must meet this requirement to run for president.
Exactly, Adam. Age is also a simple but essential rule. A candidate must be at least 35 years old. This ensures that the person has enough life experience to handle the responsibilities of being the president. In addition, a president must have lived in the United States for at least 14 years, but these years do not have to be consecutive. This requirement ensures that the president has strong ties to the country and understands its culture, people, and government well.
Julia, I often hear people say, but Elon Musk lives in the United States. Why can't he run? This is a good question for English learners because it helps us understand the difference between residency and citizenship. Residency means living somewhere, but citizenship is a legal status that may involve birth or naturalization. Elon Musk was born in South Africa, so he is not a natural-born U.S. citizen. Therefore, even though he lives and works in the United States, he cannot legally run for president under the current law.
That's a very important point, Adam. And there are also examples from history that can help our listeners understand this better. For instance, some candidates who wanted to run for president were stopped because they did not meet the natural-born citizen requirement. This shows that no matter how popular or wealthy a person is, the law is clear and applies to everyone equally. Learning about these rules is also a good way for our listeners to practice English vocabulary related to law, politics, and eligibility.
Yes, Julia, and some of our listeners may ask about naturalization. Let me explain in simple English. Naturalization is the process by which a foreign-born person becomes a U.S. citizen. However, even if someone becomes a U.S. citizen later in life, they are not considered a natural-born citizen. This means they can participate in many areas of society, like voting or working in government, but they still cannot become president. This is why legal definitions are so important and why people often misunderstand political discussions online.
Exactly, Adam. And another interesting point for English learners is the word eligibility. Eligibility means the state of being legally allowed to do something. So, when we talk about presidential eligibility, we mean whether someone meets all the rules to become president. These rules include age, citizenship, and residency. Understanding this word helps learners read news articles and listen to political discussions more easily, because it appears very often in these topics.
Yes, Julia, And it's also useful to explain why media sometimes confuses people. Media may talk about someone's ambition or possibility to become president, but that does not mean the person is legally eligible. For instance, Elon Musk may make statements about politics, and people may speculate, but speculation does not change the law. This is an important distinction for learners because it helps us separate opinions, rumors, and facts while practicing English comprehension.
Absolutely, Adam. Learning about rules like these also gives our listeners a chance to expand their vocabulary and listening skills. Words like requirement, constitutional law, residency, citizenship, and eligibility are all key terms in political discussions. By hearing these words in context and repeated naturally in conversation, learners can remember their meaning more effectively. This is one of the most practical ways to learn English, especially for students who are interested in politics, news, or current events.
Julia, one more thing for our learners. Sometimes people wonder if these rules can change. In the United States, changing the Constitution is very difficult. It requires approval from 2/3 of both houses of Congress and ratification by 3/4 of the states. So even though people may talk about hypothetical changes, it is extremely unlikely that the natural-born citizen requirement will be removed. This makes the rules clear and stable, and it helps learners understand that law and politics follow strict structures.
That's very true, Adam. And it's also a good lesson in critical thinking for our listeners. When you hear news about someone possibly running for office, always check whether it is legally possible. This is not only important for understanding politics, but also useful for learning English, because it helps learners distinguish between real information and speculation. By practicing this skill, you improve both language comprehension and reasoning skills at the same time.
So, dear listeners, to summarize this section, becoming President of the United States is not only about popularity or wealth. It requires specific rules to be followed carefully. A person must be a natural-born citizen, at least 35 years old, and have lived in the country for at least 14 years. Even someone as famous and wealthy as Elon Musk must follow these rules. Understanding these requirements helps you read, listen, and discuss political topics in English more effectively.
Yes, Adam. And for our listeners, it's a great opportunity to practice English while learning something important about politics and the law. Keep in mind the vocabulary we introduced in this section and try using it in your own sentences. You can even write a few sentences about eligibility rules in the comments section of our video. This is a fun and practical way to improve your English while thinking about interesting topics like today's.
That's right, Julia. And now that we have understood the legal rules, in the next section, we will explore how media and public speculation create discussions about Elon Musk and politics, even when the law clearly defines eligibility. This will help our listeners practice understanding opinions, news reports, and debates in English, which is very useful for real-world comprehension.
Exactly. Stay with us, dear listeners, as we continue to explore this fascinating topic in a simple and educational way, so you can improve your English while learning about current events, politics, and media influence.
Julia, now that we have discussed the legal rules for becoming president, let's talk about something that affects how people think about this topic: media and public perception. Even when the law is clear, many people wonder if someone like Elon Musk could become president because of what they see online, in newspapers, or on social media. Public perception is very powerful because it shapes opinions, discussions, and sometimes even voting behavior, even if it does not change the legal rules.
Absolutely, Adam. Media plays a very important role in shaping public perception. For example, when news channels, blogs, or social media platforms report that Elon Musk might run for president, many people start discussing it and sharing their opinions. This can create the impression that it is possible, even though the law says otherwise. It is important for our listeners to understand that media speculation is not the same as fact, and learning this distinction is very useful for English learners.
Yes, Julia. Let's explain the word speculation for our listeners. Speculation means talking or guessing about something that may or may not happen without having full information. For instance, when someone says, Elon Musk might run for president, it is speculation because it is only an idea, not confirmed information. Understanding words like this helps learners follow news stories and discussions more accurately while practicing English vocabulary in context.
That's a very good point, Adam. Public perception is also influenced by polls and trending topics. Sometimes, surveys ask people if they would vote for a famous person, even if that person cannot legally run for office. These results can make it seem like the person has political support. For English learners, it is important to understand terms like poll, survey, and trend, because they appear often in news, discussions, and educational content about politics and public opinion.
Exactly, Julia. Another interesting aspect is social media. Elon Musk himself has a very large presence on social platforms, and his statements can create headlines in a few minutes. When people read or hear these headlines, they may form opinions quickly, sometimes without checking the facts. For our listeners, learning to analyze media critically in English is a useful skill. It helps you practice reading, listening, and understanding news in a clear and educational way.
That's right, Adam. And let's also talk about why people are curious about a billionaire like Elon Musk running for president. Wealthy and famous people attract attention because their actions affect many areas, from business to social issues. Media coverage focuses on their lifestyle, achievements, and opinions. This often leads to speculation about politics, even when it is unlikely. English learners can benefit from discussing these topics because it improves vocabulary, listening skills, and comprehension of complex discussions.
Julia, I often notice that when media reports about Elon Musk and politics, they use phrases like, might consider running, public speculation, or could become a candidate. These phrases are perfect for English learners because they teach modal verbs and conditional language, which are very useful in expressing possibilities, probabilities, and hypotheticals. By listening carefully, our audience can learn how to use these expressions in their own conversations.
Absolutely, Adam. Another important point for listeners is the difference between opinion and fact. Media often publishes opinions from journalists, experts, or the public. Opinions are personal views and do not necessarily reflect reality. Facts, on the other hand, are statements that can be verified, such as the legal requirements we discussed in the previous section. Understanding this difference is essential for both English learning and thinking critically about news.
Julia, public perception is not always accurate. Sometimes people support ideas or candidates based on emotion, popularity, or personal preference, rather than facts. For example, some may like Elon Musk because of his technology and business achievements and imagine him as a president. Learning how to listen to discussions about public perception helps learners understand not only English vocabulary, but also the context behind statements, which is a key skill for comprehension.
That's a very good observation, Adam. And let's remember that English learners can also practice their skills by reflecting on these discussions. For instance, listeners can write a few sentences about their own opinion on media influence or public perception. They can use words like speculation, public opinion, trend, and influence, which we have introduced in this section. Writing and speaking practice alongside listening improves overall English fluency.
Yes, Julia. To make it practical, listeners can ask themselves questions while listening. Is this information a fact or speculation? What words indicate that it is only an opinion? How does public perception influence discussions about politics? Answering these questions in English, even in simple sentences, will help learners think critically and practice language skills at the same time.
Exactly, Adam. And another useful tip for listeners is to observe how journalists and news channels Use adjectives and adverbs to shape perception. Words like possible, unlikely, popular, or controversial often appear. By paying attention to these words, learners can improve vocabulary and understand tone, which is very important for listening comprehension and reading news in English.
Julia, another example of media speculation, is how social media trends can exaggerate a topic. For instance, a tweet or post about Elon Musk running for president may go viral and create the impression that many people support the idea. This shows how powerful public perception can be, even if it does not change legal realities. Learning to analyze trends in English helps listeners improve vocabulary related to technology, social media, and public discourse.
Yes, Adam. And one last point in this section is the educational takeaway. By discussing media speculation and public perception, our listeners practice understanding long sentences, complex ideas, and new vocabulary in context. They also learn critical thinking skills, which are essential for reading, listening, and speaking in English. Observing how opinions, facts, and speculation interact is a very practical way to become confident in English while learning about current events.
To summarize this section, Julia, public perception and media speculation often create discussions that attract attention. People imagine Elon Musk as a potential president because of his fame, achievements, and social media presence. However, speculation does not change legal facts. For English learners, listening to discussions like this improves vocabulary, comprehension, critical thinking, and understanding of news and media in simple, practical English.
Absolutely, Adam. And dear listeners, remember to reflect on how media shapes your opinions. Try to use words like speculation, public perception, trend, and opinion in your writing and speaking. This will help you not only understand English better, but also think critically about current events. Stay with us as we continue exploring Elon Musk's political statements and public views in the next section. Adam, now that we have discussed media and public perception, let's focus on Elon Musk himself and what he has said publicly about politics. Understanding his statements helps our listeners learn English while practicing how to distinguish opinion from fact. Musk has shared his thoughts on various topics, including energy, technology, space exploration, artificial intelligence, and business regulations. He also sometimes comments on social and political issues, which makes people curious about his potential political ambitions.
That's right, Julia. For our listeners, it is important to notice that public statements are different from official actions. Elon Musk may express opinions or ideas about policies or leaders, but that does not mean he is planning to run for president. In English, we often use phrases like he said or he believes to introduce opinions. For example, people may say, Elon Musk believes in free market energy policies, which is his opinion, not a government decision.
Yes, Adam. And for English learners, it is very useful to see how statements can be interpreted differently. For instance, Musk has made tweets about taxes, government regulations, and economic policies. Some people interpret these tweets as political messages, while others see them as personal opinions about business and technology. By paying attention to words like tweeted, stated, or commented, learners can better understand how English expresses communication and public statements.
Julia, another point, is that Musk often discusses innovation and progress. For example, he talks about sustainable energy, electric cars, and colonizing Mars. These topics are related to science and business, but they also intersect with political discussions because governments create laws and policies that affect these areas. English learners can practice vocabulary like innovation, regulation, sustainability, and policy when listening to these topics in context.
Exactly, Adam. And we should also note that Elon Musk's statements sometimes spark debates and discussions online. People analyze his opinions and speculate about what they might mean for politics. For English learners, following these discussions helps practice understanding opinion language, such as he thinks, he supports, he opposes, or he questions. These phrases are very useful when reading news or having conversations about current events.
Julia, another interesting aspect for learners is the difference between public statements and formal political positions. Musk can express ideas freely, but he has not officially declared a candidacy for president. English learners should notice how we use phrases like has not announced, has expressed interest, or has commented on, which are common in news reports and discussions about politics. Understanding these structures improves listening comprehension.
Absolutely, Adam. And some of Musk's opinions also touch on controversial topics. For example, he may comment on government spending, taxes, or regulations. English learners can use this as an opportunity to learn words like controversial, debate, opinion, and policy. These words appear often in discussions about politics and social issues, so practicing them in context helps learners build both vocabulary and comprehension skills.
Julia, let's also discuss how his influence comes from his businesses. Tesla, SpaceX, and other companies make Elon Musk very visible in the news. Sometimes people confuse business influence with political ambition. For English learners, it is important to notice phrases like billionaire entrepreneur, business leader, and public figure, which describe roles without implying political eligibility. These phrases are useful in professional and educational English contexts.
Yes, Adam. And understanding this distinction also helps learners analyze news critically. When media reports suggest that a business leader could influence politics, learners should ask, is this speculation or fact? They can also practice English by summarizing articles or statements using phrases like, according to him, he expressed, or his opinion is. This practice helps learners strengthen grammar and sentence structure comprehension.
Another point, Julia, is that Musk's statements often spark debates about ethics, responsibility, and leadership. For example, when he talks about artificial intelligence or space exploration, people discuss whether leaders with similar ideas should be in government. English learners can use this as an opportunity to practice expressions like should, could, it is important to, or many people believe, which are common in opinion-based discussions.
Exactly. And by listening to conversations like this, learners also get used to following a discussion that moves between facts, opinions, and speculation. This is very important for English comprehension because real-world conversations often mix these elements. Learners can practice by identifying which statements are facts, which are opinions, and which are speculative, using vocabulary and context clues.
Julia, to summarize this section, Elon Musk has shared many opinions on technology, business, and social issues. His public statements are often interpreted by media and the public in ways that create speculation about politics. For English learners, listening carefully to the words used to report opinions and statements helps improve vocabulary, comprehension, and critical thinking. Key phrases to notice include he believes, he stated, he commented, and public figure.
That's right, Adam. Dear listeners, try to pay attention to these phrases and practice using them in your own English sentences. You can also summarize Elon Musk's opinions in simple English using phrases like, he thinks that, or he believes in. This kind of practice strengthens both your listening and speaking skills while keeping the discussion educational and interesting.
Yes, Julia. And in the next section, we will explore hypothetical scenarios, where we imagine what could happen if rules were different or if Elon Musk's situation changed. This will help learners practice conditional language, vocabulary related to possibilities, and more advanced sentence structures, all while continuing to improve comprehension in English.
Exactly, Adam. Stay with us, dear listeners, as we continue to explore this fascinating topic in a simple, clear, and educational way. helping you learn English and understand how opinions, statements, and media coverage work together in discussions about politics.
Julia, now let's explore some interesting and creative scenarios that people sometimes imagine. Let's talk about what-if questions. For instance, what if the Constitution were changed to allow someone who is not a natural-born citizen to run for president? This is a purely hypothetical discussion, which means we are imagining possibilities that are not real. For our listeners, this is a chance to learn how English expresses conditional ideas and possibilities.
Exactly, Adam. When we talk about hypothetical scenarios, we use words like if, could, might, and would. For example, we can say, if the Constitution allowed foreign-born citizens, Elon Musk could run for president. This is not a statement about reality. It is simply an educational way to practice conditional sentences and hypothetical thinking in English. It also helps learners use new vocabulary like hypothetical, amendment, constitutional change, and possibility.
Julia, one idea that people sometimes discuss is the possibility of a constitutional amendment. An amendment is a change to the Constitution, which would need approval from Congress and the states. Imagine a scenario where the amendment allows foreign-born citizens to become president. In that case, someone like Elon Musk, who was born in South Africa, could legally run. This shows listeners how conditional language works, because we are discussing something that could happen, not something that has happened.
Yes, Adam. Another example is changing citizenship laws. For instance, if rules were modified to count certain foreign-born citizens as natural-born, then, hypothetically, Elon Musk might qualify. Again, this is purely speculative and educational. By thinking about these possibilities, English learners practice vocabulary and sentence structures for expressing ideas that are not real but imagined. This helps with understanding news, debates, and discussions where people often speculate about the future.
Julia, it's also useful to talk about historical examples. In the past, there have been foreign-born individuals who considered political office in the United States. While none became president, some ran for other positions or advocated for changes in rules. Discussing these cases helps listeners understand precedent, which is a legal or historical example that can influence thinking. Vocabulary like precedent, amendment, and possibility appears naturally in such discussions, which is very helpful for learning English in context.
Exactly, Adam. And for English learners, it's important to notice the structure of these sentences. We often use conditional phrases like if, then, what if, or suppose that, to express hypothetical ideas. For example, we could say, what if foreign-born candidates were allowed to run? Then Elon Musk might be eligible. These constructions are very common in English, especially in discussions about possibilities and future outcomes.
Julia, another interesting point is that thinking hypothetically can help learners practice reasoning and critical thinking in English. When we say, if the rules were different, some people could run, we are practicing how to make logical connections between conditions and outcomes. This is also useful for understanding complex news stories, discussions about law, and debates in classrooms or media, where hypothetical ideas are frequently explored.
That's right, Adam. And it's important for our listeners to understand that this discussion is educational, not political. We are not suggesting that the rules should change, nor are we endorsing anyone for office. Instead, we are using hypothetical scenarios to teach English vocabulary, conditional language, and expressions of possibility. For example, phrases like could happen, might be possible, and if this were allowed, are very useful in everyday English and academic discussions.
Julia, hypothetical discussions also help learners practice more advanced sentence structures. For example, we can say, if a constitutional change were approved, it would create new opportunities for foreign-born candidates, but it is uncertain whether this would ever happen. Long sentences like this combine conditional language, speculation, and vocabulary that learners will hear in news and media discussions. Listening to these helps learners understand context and meaning clearly.
Absolutely, Adam. Another example for learners is imagining scenarios with multiple conditions. For instance, we could say, if Elon Musk were a natural-born citizen and had political experience, he could run for president. This kind of sentence uses multiple if conditions and teaches listeners how English expresses complex hypothetical situations. Practicing this improves both listening comprehension and speaking confidence.
Julia, we can also use this opportunity to teach some related vocabulary. Words like possibility, hypothetical, amendment, constitutional change, precedent, and speculation are all connected to this discussion. By repeating them naturally in context, learners remember their meaning and usage. They can even try writing their own what-if sentences to practice English in a fun and educational way.
Yes, Adam. And dear listeners, thinking hypothetically is a safe way to explore interesting ideas without spreading false information. For example, saying, if the rules were different, Elon Musk could run, is clearly hypothetical. This teaches learners how to discuss possibilities in English responsibly. Using this approach helps with comprehension, critical thinking, and vocabulary development.
To summarize this section, Julia, hypothetical scenarios allow us to practice conditional language and explore possibilities in a safe and educational way. We discussed ideas like constitutional amendments, changes in citizenship rules, and historical precedents. All of these examples are purely speculative, but they provide excellent opportunities for English learners to practice vocabulary, sentence structures, and critical thinking in context.
Exactly, Adam. And dear listeners, as you continue listening, try creating your own hypothetical sentences using words like could, might, if, and suppose. For example, you could say, if the rules changed, many people might be able to run for president. Practicing these phrases helps you improve English comprehension, speaking, and thinking skills, all while engaging with interesting topics like today's discussion about Elon Musk and politics.
That's right, Julia. In the next section, we will explore examples of business leaders entering politics worldwide, which helps listeners understand real-life cases, compare them to Elon Musk, and practice English vocabulary related to leadership, elections, and influence. This is another important step for improving comprehension and using English in educational and practical discussions.
Stay with us, dear listeners, as we continue our exploration in simple English, helping you learn new vocabulary, sentence structures, and listening skills while understanding current events and public discussions in a safe and educational way.
Julia, now that we have explored hypothetical scenarios, let's turn our attention to real examples from around the world. Many business leaders have successfully entered politics, and their experiences can help us understand the connection between entrepreneurship and political leadership. For English learners, this is a good chance to practice words like entrepreneur, leadership skills, election campaign, challenge, and global perspective while learning about politics in a simple way.
Exactly, Adam. For instance, Donald Trump in the United States is a famous example. Before becoming president, he was a billionaire businessman and a public figure. His leadership skills in running large businesses, managing teams, and making strategic decisions helped him during his election campaign. English learners can see how vocabulary like leadership skills and campaign are used naturally in discussions about politics and business.
Yes, Julia. Another example is Silvio Berlusconi in Italy. He was a media entrepreneur and businessman before entering politics. Berlusconi's experience managing companies and negotiating deals gave him skills that were useful in government, although he also faced challenges and controversies. For our listeners, noticing how words like entrepreneur, challenge, and global perspective appear in context helps build practical vocabulary for discussions in English.
Absolutely, Adam. And there are also examples outside of Europe and the United States. In South Korea, for instance, some business leaders have tried to enter politics, using their experience running companies to connect with voters and manage administrative tasks. While their success varies, these cases show that skills from business, like decision-making, problem-solving, and leadership, can sometimes transfer to political leadership, even though politics has unique challenges.
Julia, it is important for learners to understand that business experience is not always enough to guarantee success in politics. Running an election campaign requires communication with the public, understanding social issues, and negotiating with other political leaders. This is different from managing a business, even though some skills, like strategy and leadership, can be helpful. English learners can notice phrases like transfer to political leadership and face challenges in context.
That's right, Adam. And for vocabulary practice, listeners should pay attention to the word entrepreneur, which means a person who starts and manages a business. Entrepreneurs often have skills like innovation, decision-making, and leadership, which can sometimes be applied to political leadership. However, politics also has unique challenges, such as public scrutiny, debates, and media pressure. By hearing these words in context, learners improve both comprehension and retention.
Julia, comparing Elon Musk to these examples is interesting. Musk is an entrepreneur with global influence, similar to Trump or Berlusconi in terms of business success. However, as we discussed, legal rules prevent him from running for president in the U.S. This comparison helps listeners understand the difference between fame, business success, and political eligibility. It also introduces vocabulary like global perspective, comparison, and example for English learners.
Yes, Adam. Another advantage of business leaders in politics is their ability to raise funds and manage resources efficiently. Running a large company requires planning, budgeting, and leadership, which are skills that can help during an election campaign. Listeners can practice using phrases like transfer skills and apply experience in their own sentences to describe how abilities in one area may help in another.
Julia, there are also challenges that business leaders face. Public perception can be difficult to manage because people may expect them to act like CEOs rather than politicians. Additionally, being wealthy or famous does not guarantee voter support. For English learners, this is an opportunity to practice expressions like face challenges, public perception, and voter support, while understanding real-world examples.
That's right, Adam. And global examples provide a wide perspective for learners. In countries like India, business leaders have considered running for office, using their success stories to connect with voters. In Japan and other nations, corporate leaders have occasionally moved into politics. Listening to these examples helps learners understand comparative structures, such as like, similar to, and in contrast, which are common in English explanations and discussions.
Julia, noticing comparative structures is very useful. For instance, we can say, Elon Musk is similar to Donald Trump in business success, but unlike Trump, he cannot run for president due to citizenship rules. This sentence helps learners see how English expresses similarities and differences, which is very useful for academic writing, discussions, and listening comprehension.
Exactly, Adam. And for vocabulary reinforcement, words like entrepreneur, leadership skills, challenge, election campaign, and global perspective appear naturally throughout these examples. Learners can try creating their own sentences. An entrepreneur can face challenges in politics, or leadership skills from business may help in an election campaign. This practice strengthens both speaking and comprehension skills.
Julia, another point is that learning about business leaders in politics helps listeners understand patterns and possibilities in different countries. By comparing global examples, learners gain a better understanding of how leadership, entrepreneurship, and politics interact. This also encourages learners to think critically while improving English listening and vocabulary.
That's right, Adam. And dear listeners, you can practice English by comparing leaders you know. For example, think about a famous entrepreneur in your country and imagine whether their skills could transfer to politics. Use vocabulary from this section, like challenge, leadership skills, election campaign, and entrepreneur, to describe your ideas. This exercise helps you connect language learning with real-world knowledge.
To summarize this section, Julia, business leaders often enter politics worldwide, using their experience, leadership skills, and strategic thinking. While some succeed, others face challenges such as public scrutiny and the differences between business and political environments. English learners benefit by listening to examples, understanding vocabulary, and practicing comparative structures to express similarities, differences, and global perspectives.
Exactly, Adam. Dear listeners, try to notice how we use phrases like similar to, in contrast, transfer skills, and face challenges. These are very useful in everyday English, especially when discussing politics, business, or global examples. Stay with us as we continue to explore Elon Musk, media, and public reactions in the next section, keeping English learning fun and educational.
Julia, now that we have discussed global examples of business leaders in politics, it is important to explore how the public reacts to discussions about Elon Musk running for president. Public opinion can be diverse, and reactions are often influenced by news, social media, personal beliefs, and familiarity with his work. For English learners, this is a great opportunity to practice words like opinion, reaction, perspective, debate, and discussion, which frequently appear in media and conversation.
Absolutely, Adam. Public reactions can be very different depending on the group of people or country. Some people admire Musk because of his technological achievements, innovative companies, and global impact. They may think someone with his skills could bring positive changes to politics. Others may be skeptical or critical, believing that business success does not automatically translate into political leadership. Listening to these varied reactions helps learners understand how to discuss opinions in English clearly.
Julia, an important part of understanding public opinion is noticing phrases people use to express support or disagreement. For example, someone might say, "I think Elon Musk would be a good president because he is innovative," or, "I don't believe he should run because he lacks political experience." Phrases like "I think," "I believe," "in my opinion," and "I don't think" are very common in English, and they help learners express their ideas politely and clearly.
Exactly, Adam. Social media plays a major role in shaping public reactions. Platforms like Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook allow people to share their thoughts quickly, which can amplify opinions. Some users create polls, ask questions, or post memes to express their views. English learners can practice understanding informal language, abbreviations, and expressions commonly used online, which are different from formal news reporting but still important for comprehension.
Julia, public reactions often include debates and discussions about eligibility, personality, and potential leadership style. Some people may compare Musk to other political figures or business leaders who entered politics. This is where comparative structures in English, such as similar to, in contrast, compared to, and unlike, are very useful. Learners can practice hearing and using these structures when analyzing opinions or discussing ideas.
That's right, Adam. Another interesting point for English learners is that reactions are influenced by cultural and political context. For example, people in the United States may focus more on legal eligibility and political experience, while international audiences may emphasize Musk's global impact and business achievements. By paying attention to these differences, learners improve their understanding of perspective, nuance, and context in English.
Julia, let's also talk about critical opinions. Some members of the public may express concerns about Musk's communication style, controversial statements, or unpredictable behavior. English learners can notice phrases like concerned about, critical of, cautious about, and questionable actions. Understanding these phrases in context helps learners expand vocabulary, and describe both support and criticism in English.
Yes, Adam. It is also important to understand that public opinion is rarely uniform. For example, one person might say, "I admire his innovation," while another says, "He is too unpredictable for politics." Listening to both sides helps learners understand contrasting viewpoints and teaches them how to discuss multiple perspectives using English phrases such as "on one hand," "on the other hand," "some people believe," while others think, or "although," "yet."
Julia. Public opinion is often shaped by media framing. Media outlets choose words and headlines that can influence reactions. For instance, words like potential candidate, controversial figure, tech billionaire, visionary entrepreneur, or possible future leader can create excitement or skepticism. English learners can practice recognizing these subtle cues to improve comprehension of news articles, podcasts, and discussions about politics.
Exactly, Adam. Another interesting element is the use of speculative language in public reactions. People often say, "He might run," "It is possible he could enter politics," or "Some think he may consider it." These conditional and speculative phrases are very useful for English learners because they are used frequently in discussions about politics, current events, and future possibilities. Practicing them helps learners express uncertainty politely and accurately.
Julia, another tip for learners is to notice adjectives and adverbs used to describe public opinion. Words like enthusiastic, skeptical, supportive, doubtful, positive, negative, and mixed reactions appear often. By understanding and using these words, learners can describe different kinds of opinions in their own writing and speaking, which improves both vocabulary and communication skills.
That's a very good point, Adam. Another technique for English learners is summarizing public reactions. For instance, listeners can try to write a few sentences like, "Some people think Elon Musk would bring innovation to politics, while others worry about his unpredictability." Summarizing helps learners practice using vocabulary, sentence structures, and comparative language while reinforcing comprehension of complex ideas.
Julia, let's also discuss the educational takeaway. By listening to how people react, learners practice distinguishing facts from opinions, understanding context, and identifying speculative language. They also learn to describe reactions using phrases like supportive of, critical of, concerned about, and enthusiastic about. These skills are very practical for academic discussions, debates, and real-life communication in English.
Exactly, Adam. Dear listeners, public reactions to Elon Musk entering politics are diverse, ranging from admiration and excitement to skepticism and concern. By paying attention to phrases, adjectives, and speculative language, you can practice listening comprehension, vocabulary, and expressing opinions clearly in English. You can even discuss these reactions with friends or in writing to improve fluency and critical thinking.
To summarize this section, Julia, public reactions and opinions show a wide variety of perspectives. Some people support Musk because of his innovation and global influence, while others are skeptical due to political experience or behavior. English learners can benefit from understanding these reactions, practicing phrases for opinions, speculation, and comparisons, and learning vocabulary like reaction, opinion, debate, perspective, and discussion.
That's right, Adam. And dear listeners, in the next section we will explore the potential impact of Elon Musk's ideas on technology and society if he were involved in politics, helping you expand vocabulary, understand cause and effect relationships, and practice English in a real-world context while keeping the discussion educational.
Julia. In this section, we are going to explore public opinion using polls and surveys. Even when someone is not legally eligible to run for president, polls can measure public interest in a figure like Elon Musk. These numbers do not mean he can run, but they show how many people support or like the idea of him being a leader. For English learners, this is a great opportunity to practice words like survey, poll, percentage, trend, and public opinion in context.
That's right, Adam. A poll is a method of asking people questions to find out what they think about a topic, and a survey is a similar tool that may ask more detailed questions. Polls and surveys often report results using percentages. For example, a poll might say, 45% of respondents think Elon Musk could be a good president. This teaches English learners how numbers and language appear together in real-life discussions.
Julia, it is important to remember that numbers in polls show interest, not eligibility. Even if many people support Elon Musk in a survey, this does not mean he is legally allowed to run. This distinction helps learners understand the difference between public opinion and legal reality. Listening to these explanations also improves comprehension of conditional language and facts versus opinions in English.
Exactly, Adam. Another key point for learners is understanding trends. A trend shows how public opinion changes over time. For instance, a poll might report that 30% of people supported Musk last year, and 45% support him now. This shows an increasing trend. English learners can practice hearing and repeating numbers, percentages, and descriptive words like increase, decrease, rise, fall, or trend to describe data clearly.
Julia, I often see people misinterpret poll results. For instance, some may think a high percentage of support means a candidate can run, but as we discussed, eligibility rules matter more than interest. English learners should notice phrases like percentage of respondents, according to the survey, trend over time, and public opinion indicates, which are very useful when discussing numbers and surveys.
That's a very good point, Adam. Listeners can also practice asking questions to interpret data. For example, you might ask, what percentage of people support this idea? Or, has support increased or decreased compared to last year? Asking and answering questions in English helps learners practice vocabulary related to polls, numbers, trends, and opinions in a meaningful way.
Julia, another educational takeaway is listening for numbers in conversation. In spoken English, numbers may be expressed in different ways. For example, 45% can also be said as almost half of respondents. Understanding these variations is very important for learners when listening to podcasts, news, or classroom discussions.
Absolutely, Adam. And polls often include additional questions, such as age, location, or profession of respondents. For English learners, listening to phrases like according to the survey, respondents aged 18 to 35, percentage by location, trend among professionals helps practice comprehension of more complex sentences while still keeping the language clear and simple.
Julia, public opinion is sometimes surprising. A survey may show that a significant number of people support an idea, even if it is not legally possible. For example, a poll could report that 40% of people say they would vote for Elon Musk if he could run. English learners can notice words like significant, support, interest, and hypothetical scenarios. This also teaches critical thinking alongside listening skills.
Yes, Adam. Another useful skill for learners is summarizing survey results. For example, you can say, according to a recent survey, 52% of respondents expressed interest, while 30% were unsure and 18% opposed the idea. Practicing sentences like this improves both speaking and listening comprehension, especially with numbers and percentages.
Julia, trends over time are also very educational. For instance, if a survey shows a rising trend of support, we can say, public opinion is increasing steadily. If support falls, we can say, there is a downward trend in interest. These phrases help learners describe changes clearly and are commonly used in English discussions about polls, news, and research studies.
That's right, Adam. We should also teach listeners about comparisons in survey data. For example, you might say, support among young adults is higher than among older adults, or interest in one region is greater than another. Using comparative structures with numbers helps learners practice both vocabulary and grammar, while understanding public opinion clearly.
Julia, another point is learning to interpret mixed results. Not every poll shows clear support or opposition. Sometimes responses are split, such as 35% support, 35% oppose, and 30% are undecided. English learners can practice describing these results using words like mixed opinions, divided public, nearly equal, and uncertain responses, which are common in discussions of public opinion.
Exactly, Adam. And, dear listeners, by practicing listening to surveys, polls, and percentages, you also improve your ability to analyze information critically. This is an essential skill for learning English because it combines numbers, vocabulary, and comprehension, helping learners understand complex topics in a simple and practical way.
To summarize this section, Julia, polls and surveys show public interest and opinion, even for figures like Elon Musk, who are not eligible to run. Listening carefully to percentages, trends, and comparative data helps English learners practice vocabulary like survey, poll, percentage, trend, and public opinion. It also improves comprehension of numbers, conditional language, and interpreting data in context.
That's right, Adam. Dear listeners, try to notice numbers, percentages, and trends in English news, podcasts, and discussions. Practice describing them using phrases like according to the survey, percentage of respondents, increasing trend, and public opinion shows. This exercise will strengthen your listening skills, vocabulary, and ability to discuss topics about public opinion confidently in English. Adam, as we come toward the end of our discussion, it is a great time to summarize the educational insights that listeners can take from today's podcast. First, we explored the topic of eligibility, explaining why Elon Musk, despite public interest, cannot run for president due to legal rules. This helps learners understand how to combine facts with opinion when analyzing news and discussions, which is very important for comprehension.
That's a good point, Julia. Could you explain again why understanding eligibility is important for English learners, especially when we hear news stories about figures in politics or business? This helps reinforce comprehension and ensures listeners clearly understand the difference between facts and speculation.
Of course, Adam. Understanding eligibility teaches learners how to distinguish legal reality from public perception. For example, while polls show many people support Musk hypothetically, he does not meet constitutional requirements. English learners can practice using phrases like cannot run, not eligible, or restricted by law to describe legal facts, and compare them with opinions using phrases like people think, some believe, in my opinion.
Julia. Another key point is influence and leadership skills. We discussed how business leaders like Musk, Trump, or Berlusconi may transfer their leadership skills to politics. For English learners, phrases like leadership skills, influence, strategic decisions, and decision-making are useful vocabulary when talking about professionals or public figures. How can listeners practice these words in their own English?
Adam, one effective way is to use these phrases in sentences about familiar people or news topics. For example, you could say, the CEO used her leadership skills to solve problems, or public figures can have influence over opinions. By repeating and using vocabulary in context, learners reinforce comprehension and improve speaking confidence. This is also an excellent method for practicing listening and comprehension, because learners can match words with real-life examples.
That's a very good point, Julia. Another educational insight is media literacy. Listeners learned how public reactions, tweets, polls, and surveys can shape opinions, but they do not always reflect facts. For learners, understanding words like media, coverage, framing, speculation, and reaction helps in identifying main ideas and separating opinion from reality when consuming English news or podcasts.
Exactly, Adam. We also emphasized public perception and how it can differ from reality. People may support someone in theory or express excitement online, but legal rules and political procedures create limits. English learners can practice sentences like, "Public perception shows interest, but the law does not allow it," which reinforces vocabulary and comprehension in real-world discussions.
Julia, a very important skill for learners is reinforcement of the vocabulary and phrases we used throughout this podcast. Words like educational insight, comprehension, discussion, reinforcement, practice, trend, survey, opinion, hypothetical, amendment, eligibility, leadership, influence, and media literacy were repeated in context. Repetition helps learners consolidate new words effectively.
That's right, Adam. Learners can also reinforce their understanding by summarizing the discussion. For example, after listening, you can say, "Today we learned about Elon Musk, eligibility, public opinion, polls, and leadership skills. We practiced vocabulary and understood hypothetical scenarios." Summarizing like this helps consolidate main ideas and improve English comprehension while practicing speaking.
Julia, how can listeners practice listening and comprehension using these lessons? For example, when they read or hear news, they can identify key vocabulary and ideas, ask questions like, "Who is involved?" or "What is the main issue?" and then try to express their understanding using phrases like, "According to the survey," "In my opinion," "Trends show," or "Public perception indicates."
Exactly, Adam. Another practical tip is to practice discussion with friends or in a study group. Listeners can choose a news topic, summarize main points, and use vocabulary and phrases from today's podcast. Words like discussion, comprehension, reinforcement, practice, educational insight, and trend are particularly useful because they appear in many news, educational, and professional contexts.
Julia, it is also helpful for learners to notice main ideas and supporting details while listening. For example, in today's podcast, the main idea was whether Elon Musk could hypothetically run for president. Supporting details included public opinion, polls, leadership skills, eligibility, and global examples. Practicing this skill improves comprehension, retention, and the ability to discuss topics clearly in English.
That's right, Adam. Finally, learners should remember that English learning is strengthened by active engagement. Listening carefully, repeating sentences, practicing new vocabulary, summarizing discussions, and asking questions all help. Using news topics like Elon Musk or other public figures creates engaging content while supporting listening, speaking, and comprehension practice in a safe and educational way.
To summarize, Julia, the key educational insights from this podcast include understanding eligibility, leadership skills, influence, media literacy, and public perception. Listeners should focus on vocabulary reinforcement, practicing conditional and speculative language, identifying main ideas, and summarizing discussions to consolidate comprehension and speaking skills.
Exactly, Adam. Dear listeners, by practicing these techniques, you can improve your English listening, speaking, and comprehension every day. Use phrases like educational insight, discussion, comprehension, reinforcement, and practice in your own sentences. Review new vocabulary, summarize discussions, and pay attention to main ideas. This approach makes learning English enjoyable, meaningful, and practical.
Julia, as we come to the conclusion of today's podcast, it is a great time to reflect on everything we discussed. Reflection is an important part of learning English because it helps listeners think deeply about the topic and how language is used. Today, we explored whether Elon Musk could run for president, public opinion, leadership skills, eligibility rules, and media reactions. Reflection allows learners to connect vocabulary and ideas with real-world knowledge.
Exactly, Adam. Reflection and critical thinking are key for learners when engaging with news or online discussions. Many people share opinions or rumors about political figures like Elon Musk, and listeners need to understand how to separate facts from speculation. Phrases like "I think, in my opinion, it seems, according to the survey," and some people believe are very helpful for expressing ideas clearly in English.
Julia, for English learners, it is also important to summarize the main ideas in a discussion. Today, we covered eligibility rules, leadership skills of business figures, public opinion, polls and surveys, media influence, and hypothetical scenarios. Summarizing helps learners practice critical thinking, comprehension, and reflection while reinforcing vocabulary like discussion, strategy, current events, reflection, and critical thinking in context.
That's right, Adam. Another educational takeaway is learning to express personal opinions respectfully. When discussing news or politics, English learners can use phrases like "I think," "in my opinion," "some people believe," or "it seems to me." These expressions are common in everyday English and allow learners to participate in discussions about current events safely and clearly.
Julia, it's also useful to ask reflective questions that encourage thinking critically. For example, listeners can ask themselves, what is the difference between public opinion and eligibility? Or, how can media influence perceptions of public figures? These types of questions improve listening comprehension, analytical skills, and help learners connect vocabulary and phrases with real-world scenarios.
Yes, Adam. Another strategy is to practice summarizing discussions using simple English. Listeners can try writing a few sentences like, "Today I learned about Elon Musk, eligibility rules, public opinion, polls, and leadership skills. I practiced vocabulary and listened to discussions to improve my English summarizing reinforces comprehension, vocabulary, and speaking confidence at the same time."
Julia, let's also remind listeners about vocabulary and phrases we have used throughout the podcast. Words like reflection, critical thinking, discussion, strategy, current events, survey, trend, leadership skills, influence, eligibility, media literacy, and opinion are very useful. Listeners can practice these words by making sentences, summarizing ideas, or explaining their thoughts about news topics.
Exactly, Adam. Another strategy is to engage in conversations with friends or study groups. Learners can discuss current events, share opinions, or ask reflective questions like, "Do you think public opinion reflects reality?" Using vocabulary and phrases in context helps improve fluency, comprehension, and confidence while connecting English learning to understanding the world.
Julia, one more point for learners is listening carefully to the structure of the discussion. Today, we practiced listening to comparisons, conditional sentences, trends, percentages, hypothetical scenarios, and contrasting opinions. These listening strategies are useful for understanding podcasts, news, or classroom discussions, and they help learners identify main ideas and key details effectively.
That's right, Adam. Dear listeners, connecting English learning with current events makes the experience meaningful and practical. By listening to discussions about political figures, public opinion, polls, and leadership, learners can practice comprehension, expand vocabulary, and express personal thoughts using safe and structured English phrases.
Julia, as a final reflection, we encourage listeners to think critically about news and rumors, especially on social media. Ask yourself, is this fact or opinion? What do polls actually tell us? How do leadership skills relate to politics? Reflecting in English while practicing vocabulary like critical thinking, reflection, discussion, strategy, and current events strengthens language skills and understanding of the world.
Exactly, Adam. And dear listeners, we invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. You can discuss topics like eligibility rules, the influence of business leaders, public opinion, media impact, or leadership skills. Try using vocabulary and phrases from this podcast while expressing your personal opinion clearly and politely in English.
To summarize Section 10, Julia, reflection and critical thinking are essential tools for learners. Reviewing vocabulary, analyzing discussions, asking questions, summarizing main ideas, and connecting English practice to current events allows learners to improve comprehension, speaking, and listening. This approach makes learning English both practical and enjoyable.
That's right, Adam. Dear listeners, thank you for joining us in today's discussion. Keep practicing by listening, summarizing, expressing your opinions, and reflecting on topics you read or hear about in English. This not only strengthens your language skills, but also helps you understand the world better. We hope you enjoyed the podcast and learned many new words, phrases, and strategies.
Julia, it has been a pleasure guiding our listeners today. Remember, English learning and critical thinking go hand in hand. Use today's vocabulary, think critically, and connect discussions to your daily life. This practice will make your English stronger and your understanding of news, leadership, and public opinion more meaningful.
Yes, Adam. And dear listeners, we look forward to welcoming you back to the English Globe for our next educational podcast. Keep learning, reflecting, and practicing English every day. By doing this, you will continue to improve comprehension, vocabulary, and the ability to express yourself clearly about current events and discussions around the world.